welcome. This is going to be a Dharma talk, so to speak, on the Cliches from yoga philosophy. So the Cliches are another part of yoga philosophy to bring us to wholeness. I love how the different parts of yoga philosophy all point back towards bringing us back to ourselves, to this sense of oneness and wholeness. If we reflect back on the koshas, we remember the layers of our existence and helping us become more aware of what might be out of balance, what needs more attention. The koshas are the layers of the body, the breath or energy, the mind, intellect, and bliss, connecting to our spirit. So when we arrive at the Cliches, they speak of hindrances or blockages, obstacles, all a little on the dark side, I guess you might consider, but I think of them as ways that we can be not in touch with our true self. So I'll just briefly talk on these ways and then we'll center and start with some of our material. So the 5 klesas are avidya, or ways where we are not okay with reality or not connecting to our true self. We're connected more to everything in the outside world as opposed to our own inner state of well-being. And this is kind of like the blanket for all the other kleshas, which follow as asmitya, egoism, either inflated or deflated ego, and we'll break that down. Then we have attachments and aversions. We all know these. And then fear. In the Cliches sense of the word, they're really pointing towards the fear of death, but I often weave in all the other fears that we tend to struggle with. So for me, when I feel off balance, sometimes, it takes a getting quiet, a stilling of the mind to really consider which one of these Cliches may be blocking me from my true self. And again, we'll continue to reflect and deconstruct some of these ideas. So let's take a moment to settle in. Find your comfortable seat, whatever that looks like to you. Lengthen up your spine. Relax your shoulders. I feel like I spouted out a lot of information there in the beginning. Just let that kind of wash off your back, so to speak. Clear your plate with this connection to your breath. Simply noticing the breath move in, the breath move out. Taking the time to just connect with your breath, turn inward, maybe many times through your day, can help you to see where you may be becoming off balance, whether it's through the kosha system or the klesha system. So again, just take another moment to be still and notice how you feel in this moment. whenever you're ready, flicker your eyes open. And whatever you noticed in that pocket of stillness is really just information. There's no judgment. We need to have those levels of awareness so we can move forward using the tools of yoga to help us on our way. So I have a bunch of books here in front of me that I use for inspiration to deliver this talk to you. We're going to start with The Heart of Yoga, Developing a Personal Practice by TKV Desikar. And a little inspiration from The Pure Heart of Yoga, Robert Butera. Meditations from the Mat by Rolf Gates. Some reflections back on my yoga therapy training, comprehensive yoga therapy, manual level 1, and I believe this was mostly written by Robert Butera. And in closing, we're going to close with just a little guided meditation by Stephen Levine, A Year to Live. How to live this year as if it were your last. Wonderful, wonderful teaching. So I'd like to begin with a little reading from TKV Desikar, and I'm sorry if I'm not saying his name right. It's funny how things can cycle back and new insights can come even when you feel as if you are pretty adept at a topic. So when I went to prepare for this Dharma talk for you all, I opened up this book and read a passage or a chapter that I hadn't read before, and it really clicked for me as to what the Cliches are all about, and maybe with some new insight for me that I'd like to share with you. So just settle yourself, maybe close your eyes. I'm going to read to you for just a little bit here. So really just allow these words to wash over you, and then we'll work on kind of breaking down each of the Cliches. And even the title to this chapter just sparked my curiosity. It's called The Things That Darken the Heart. Even coming back to one of the niyamas in Tosha that we've talked about, how finding contentment isn't always just everything, shiny and rosy. It's recognizing the light and the dark and how to navigate that in our world. So he starts. There are many definitions of yoga, and I have already mentioned some of them. Yoga as the movement from one point to another, a higher one. Yoga as the bringing together, the unifying of two things. And yoga as action with undivided, uninterrupted attention. These definitions of yoga have one thing in common, the idea that something changes. This change must bring us to a point where we have never been before. That is to say, that which was impossible becomes possible. That which was unattainable becomes attainable. That which was invisible can be seen. One of the basic reasons many people take up yoga is to change something about themselves, to be able to think more clearly, to feel better, and to be able to act better today than they did yesterday in all areas of life. In these endeavors, yoga can be of great help, and it requires no prerequisites that must be fulfilled before we set out on this path. Why do we set out on this journey at all? Because we sense that we do not always do what might be best for ourselves or others. Because we notice that we often do not recognize the things around us and in us clearly enough. And why does this happen? Because the veil of avidya is that spiritual ignorance, so to speak, or not being okay with reality or in touch with our true self. Because the veil of avidya clouds our perceptions. We can, in any given moment, be right or wrong in our assessment of a situation. But this is something we cannot tell at the time. If our view of a situation is false, then avidya is present, and that ensuing action will be clouded by it. In this way, avidya influences both our actions and the results of our actions, which we will sooner or later have to confront. We have already talked about the fact that from the yoga point of view, everything is real and there is no illusion. Even avidya, the source of so many problems, has a value and is real. Everything we see and experience is accepted. The essential purpose of yoga practice is to reduce avidya so that understanding can gradually come to the surface. But how can we know whether we have seen and understood things clearly? When we see the truth, when we reach a level that is higher than our normal everyday understanding, something deep within us is very quiet and peaceful. Then there is contentment that nothing can take from us. It is not the kind of satisfaction derived from gazing at a beautiful object. It is much more than this. It is a satisfaction deep within us that is free from feeling and judgment. The center of this contentment is the Purusha. And we talked before about Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is that unchanging quality within us, within our world. Sometimes they reflect back on our personal intentions for practice. Prakriti is that is changing. Everything around us is changing. And we identify more with Prakriti, all those unchanging things, we tend to suffer. So yoga brings us back to that sense of Purusha, that peace that cannot be disturbed by the circumstances of our lives. So then he just talks briefly about the 5 cliches, and then we'll move on. So I've already described how avidya is expressed and experienced in 4 different ways. One way is asmita, the ego. I am right. I am sad. I am yoga teacher. These are statements of asmita, identifying with ego. We identify completely with something that might possibly change, Prakriti, and may no longer belong to us tomorrow. Another form of avidya is raja, the desire to have something whether we need it or not, attachments. A third form is dvisha, which manifests as refusing things and having feelings of hatred, aversion. And finally, there is abhinavasa, or fear, afraid of death. We cling to life with all our might. These are the 4 possible ways in which avidya is expressed. I could just read you that whole chapter. It's beautiful, wonderful insights, and we may come back to it at a later time. So let's take a moment to really deconstruct now each one of those cliches and see how we might create some subtle shifts in our awareness by considering these topics. So the first one, avidya, we've discussed a little bit here, and I'd like to read to you from the actual source, from Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras. So he says, avidya, ignorance, consists of regarding a transient object as everlasting, impure object as pure, misery as happiness, and the non-self as self. So again, reflecting right back to those ideas of Purusha, pure spirit, and Prakriti, unchanging. The changing versus the unchanging aspects of ourselves, of our reality. And when we talk about ignorance, a lot of times avidya is called spiritual ignorance. It doesn't mean we need more knowledge. It doesn't mean that, we lack intelligence. It means that we have a misunderstanding of the nature of reality. Change is constant and brings suffering. Peace is achieved by identifying with something permanent. Purusha. So keep reflecting back again and again to those very basic tenets of yoga philosophy that we began with. So let's just take a moment once again to get still after I discuss these different parts of the Cliches system. I'm just going to invite us to be still and contemplate or reflect. It's in these reflections that sometimes we have insight and can again connect more to that unchanging quality within us rather than that prakriti or everything that's changing around us. And let's face it, there's a lot of prakriti out there right now. There's a lot of changing. And I really feel like that is why there is some suffering, because we are not okay with our reality. We are fighting, up against it. So when we can just look at that a little bit, it can bring a little spaciousness around these levels of fear and inability to be with a changing world, which, let's face it, the world has always been changing. So take a moment to just find a comfortable seat, get quiet, maybe close your eyes. Slow your breath down. Relax your face, your jaw, your body. And you may come back to this idea for a longer meditation later, today, tomorrow, next month, but just for a moment, can you get still and contemplate the unchanging nature of yourself? Maybe it's a certain quality. Maybe you come back to your intention if you found an intention that really aligns with you. We can fall into those intentions like they really speak a deep, unchanging truth about ourselves, about our nature as humans. Or maybe, if you really haven't found a word that truly aligns with you, you just contemplate the lightness within you. The light that cannot be obstructed. Maybe it's a sense of lightness that unites not just you, but all humanity. Contemplate the unchanging nature of you. And maybe you sense that unchanging place within you at the top or the bottom of your breath when there's stillness, or even in the movement of your breath. This is very personal. Have your own experience. whenever you're ready, you can flick your eyes open. Back into the space. And I'd like to close our discussion on avidya with just a short reading from Meditations from the Map by Rolf. And he starts again with a quote from the Yoga Sutras. Lack of true knowledge is the source of all pains and sorrows. The first of the afflictions is avidya, or spiritual ignorance, the cause of all of the remaining afflictions. The fear that drives us away from ourselves is rooted in our spiritual ignorance. We do not know who we really are. If we did, we would realize that there is nothing to fear. We would know that we are everything we have always hoped we would be, but never believed we could be. If this is never believing, it is this never believing that is the problem. For with it comes an endless array of compensations. And with each action that stems from the misinformation, we are ensnared more deeply in our illusion. The good news is that we are who we are. We are all aspects of the Divine Spirit. And this will always be true. It has always been so, and will be so forevermore. I believe that those of us who practice yoga have been sent to yoga by our pain. We embark on this path because we have a hunch that there must be a better way. We have grown tired of our perfectionism, our unhappy relationships with our bodies, our inability to love completely or to be loved completely, our endless resentments and sorrows, our sense that we could become greater than we are, but are somehow blocked. Many of us have considerable good fortune. We were blessed with a nice smile, the right education, the right opportunities. We may have had loving partners, parents, good work, and healthy families. Yet we found that arranging our externals in just the right way doesn't bring us the happiness we hoped it would. The resting place always seems to be just over the next hill. And we have grown tired. We have come to yoga in the grip of avidya. We come to yoga having forgotten where we came from and who we are. On our mats we find the truth. We are of God, and there are no problems. We are the solution. It takes a little work, but we are the solution. So moving on to the next klesha, asmita, or egoism. And I start with the direct quote from the Yoga Sutras. This is from the second chapter of the Yoga Sutras, as was our first line. Asmita, I-ness, is tantamount to the identification of Purusha, pure consciousness, with intellect. So basically what he's saying, I believe, is that when we confuse the intellect, the mind, our thoughts, our monkey mind, our sense of who we are by identifying with the mind, we suffer. So yoga helps a practitioner reduce their ego by stilling the mind to better reflect pure consciousness. So again, it's not just in the physical postures. We can have lots of insight in the physical postures, in the stillness of the mind that comes with the movements, but also taking the time for reflection, for stilling the mind, that we can see which of the klesas might be blocking our full expression of ourselves, so to speak. Low self-esteem also takes away from identifying with pure consciousness, just as much as high self-esteem. So we need to examine both expressions and how we speak to ourselves. That negative self-talk that is, fairly common with a lot of us is perhaps a reflection of deflated ego, in that we're identifying with that voice in our head. If anyone wants to just really dive deep into the voice in the head, I would recommend, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. He really talks a lot about how that voice in our head is really just a voice, and we over-identify with that. And I think, again, all these wisdom teachers, be they Buddhist, psychologists, yogis, different wisdom teachers, I feel as if poets, like one of my favorite poets, Mark Nepo, I feel like they all point back to some of these basic truths that we identify a lot with, what's happening in the mind as opposed to what's happening in the soul. And this is where asmita, or that grip of our ego, can block us from, really seeing who we really are. So that being said, let's take a moment to contemplate. Again, it's in the stilling of the mind. It's in yourself as the teacher that the most wisdom is gained. So let's take another moment to get really still, and we're going to kind of build on that first contemplation. So find your comfortable seat, whatever that looks like, and you could lie down, whatever is serving you in this moment. The idea is that you're inviting your body to become still, even just for a moment. Close your eyes. Feel your breath. And that breath can be such a doorway inward. Coming back to that first idea in yoga philosophy of these layers of the koshas, using our breath to access some of the inner layers, the inner workings, our inner self. So take a moment to just contemplate the question, who am I? And if your first thought that came into your mind was something like your role at work, your role as a mother or a daughter, see if you can go a little bit deeper to come back to that first question that we pondered. See if you can ask yourself, who am I? Or what am I? Removing the roles, the identifications, and identify with your unchanging place. And when you're ready, let's look at those eyes open and refer back to that question, a very good question to sit with, to kind of help you see those veils of the cliches kind of parting, so to speak. To close this part on asmita, or egoism, I just wanted to read you a short passage from Meditations from the Mat. And I didn't even notice this before, but the first little quote he includes here is from the prayer of St. Francis. I think I did include that somewhere in your manual, and that is a prayer that I often consider reflects right back to the Cliches. Again, that linking of different wisdom traditions to this knowledge that universe is universal. So he says, this is from the prayer of St. Francis, "For it is by self-forgetting that one finds." And then Rolf goes on to contemplate that. "Over time, the practices of yoga create a state of grace in the practitioner. Asmita is the suffering that comes from self-centered fear. As long as we are the unworthy person around whom the world revolves, the pressure is enormous, the fears legion. As yoga refines our natural abilities, releases blocked energy back into our lives, and clears our minds, our hearts become calm, and we simply forget our suffering. Yoga wears away the self-centered fear that is asmita. Each posture, each breath we take, loosens our grip on the life that we have lived and allows for the birth of a new one. Eventually, caught up in this beautiful work of being present for grace, we forget about ourselves. And through self-forgetting, we find ourselves." So now we move on to the next of the Cliches, called Raja, or attachments. And we start with the direct quote from the Yoga Sutras, chapter 2, line 7, I believe. "Attachment is what follows the remembrance of pleasure." Let's face it, we like what we like. We want to return to those pleasurable moments. We mourn a bit at the loss of life as we knew it. We mourn a little bit when we end our vacation. These are all natural tendencies. Just yoga teaches us that we want to examine that a bit and see if we can become a bit more neutral in all things. Attachment isn't just to material objects, as I reflected on. They can be to people, experiences, and also an avoidance of pain. We may distract ourselves by busyness to avoid truly feeling. This is another form of attachment. We're attached to the busyness. However, there are some healthy attachments, and these are things that bring us into self-care and ways that we nurture ourselves. So things that may increase our spiritual sense, such as our families. It's normal to have some attachment there. Without it, we might not maintain family attachments and lose that joy. Having attachments such as this can give us a vehicle, so to speak, to express and feel love. Other attachments that are healthy, things like brushing your teeth, healthy exercise habits, healthy eating habits, but we can see how the line can get skewed rather easily when we consider more like compulsive type eating regimes or compulsive exercise regimes. So there's that fine line between being attached, if I don't get my run in, my whole day will just be awful. If I eat a piece of chocolate, I'm bad. Those types of things. There can also be healthy and unhealthy attachments to things like our yoga teachers. So something to consider, especially in the yoga world. I think we've all heard of some very bad stories of excessive attachment and overuse of power with some gurus. This comes down to the very basic, you show up for a yoga class and you're expecting your yoga teacher that you have a connection to, and she is on vacation or ill and a sub is there, and some people suffer greatly because of this particular attachment, and cannot even get into the yoga class or even walk out the door. So that's definitely an unhealthy attachment in the yoga world. Just something to think about. So take a moment to get quiet. I'm just going to walk you through a passage to reflect on. So find your stillness. Maybe take a small moment to contemplate an attachment that you feel that you have, or you could release a little bit from. Continue to breathe deeply and just let this passage wash over you. This too shall pass. As morning comes, the clouds pass. Later noon comes clouds. Clouds move by. The sun rises higher in the sky. All things are changing. Why be attached to anything? Noon to afternoon, clouds pass. Evening comes as the sun lowers. The sun sets. All is changing. Night comes, giving way to midnight and dawn. All things are changing. Why be attached to anything? When you're ready, open your eyes. So now we consider the opposite of attachment, devesa, or aversion. And in Yoga Sutras, the direct quote is, aversion is that which results in misery. Dislike of what we perceive to be unpleasant. This can be manifested as anger, discontent, denial, avoidance, or cause us to relive negative emotions over and over again. Aversion. And again, just like attachments, we all have them. The idea, particularly behind the cliches, is that we will never be completely free of these afflictions. Maybe some very high level gurus or masters have aspired to that place, but for us everyday householders, they're just tools for us to think about how we could become more neutral, how we suffer when we push away what we don't like. And often, if we just allow it, that's been one of my words that's been speaking to me lately, is allow. Just allow all things without having to be too attached to averse. Change is happening. Said the sun sets, the sun rises. Change is inevitable. Just as if our likes and dislikes are inevitable. But can we just step back a little bit and hold that all a little bit less tightly and rigidly? Another idea here is that we can even be averse to our own personality. And we touched on that a little bit when we talked of egoism or deflated ego. Again, it's very interesting how all of these concepts intermingle, but if we're averse to our own personality, we may be subject to a lot of negative self-talk. We're averse to who we are. And yoga teaches us that, we need to make peace with who we are, because when we, again, go back to the very beginning of Purusha and Prakriti, if we can identify with the unchanging spiritual nature of ourselves, there is nothing to dislike. There is nothing to push away, because we truly all are the spark of the divine. So if we could see ourselves in that light, there would be nothing to push away. It would be more of an accepting, embracing quality. Another idea with aversion is that sometimes, and this one's hard, sometimes we're averse to certain people because we actually see qualities that we possess in ourselves, in them. And this is actually what we are averse to. So these people can be our greatest teachers if we can allow it. By learning to love others, accept all their qualities, it could help us accept all of our own qualities and heal from the past. So let's take a moment again to get still, cross your legs, and contemplate something that we are averse to. So sit tall. Relax your face, your jaw. Maybe you think of a certain task that you just don't like doing. Maybe it's cooking. Maybe it's folding laundry, doing dishes. Maybe it's spending time, be it with a certain individual. Just come up with something in your mind that you typically do not really care to do. And I feel like the antidote a bit to aversion can be mindfulness. So can we bring a level of mindful attention in our mind to this particular task? If it's being with a certain person that we really don't like spending time with, can we just be quiet? Can we listen? Can we allow? Allow all of their qualities. If it's a certain task, such as cooking, doing laundry, maybe even going to work, Can you bring your mindful attention to it? A line I like to tell myself when I'm struggling with something that I really don't like, or spending time in a way that doesn't seem to be the way I want to spend my time, is to simply say, all of my moments are mine. Maybe you say that to yourself. All of my moments are mine. When I bring in aversion, I deny myself the full experience of what is happening. All my moments are mine. And whenever you're ready, just open your eyes. And maybe the next thing, you're kind of in the muck with yourself, feeling those veils of cliches, darkness, because you just really do not like someone or something. You can just say to yourself, all of my moments are mine, and just try not to steal from this present moment with your rigidness, and be present. So our last klesha is abinivisa, or fear. And again, this from the Cliches really talks of the primal fear of death. This primal fear of death goes right to our kind of mammalian nervous system of fight or flight and deep-rooted fear for our own survival. So this is, can be a very real and valid fear. So straight from the Yoga Sutra, Sutra Chapter 2, abinivisa is in the ignorant. So in the learned, the firmly established fear of annihilation is the affliction called abinivisa. So this deep fear of us not being here anymore. The deep fear of the ego self dying. So our physical self not being here anymore. We can also say this fear of death is tied very realistically to the fear of the unknown. We don't know what's in the next world. Death threatens the ego. But this fear can distract us from fully living. And also recognizing that we are a spiritual being, and that maybe our life goes on in a different way after death. Can we practice the opposite, or that bhavana that we talked about, I think, in our last one of our Dharma talks? Bhavana in yoga speaks to cultivating the opposite. So maybe the opposite of fear for some could be love. It could also be courage. We can be courageous, maybe by trying something new, whether it be on our yoga mat, by letting ourselves get a little bit uncomfortable out in the world. When I spoke of fear being very primal and into the mammalian nervous system. So we can circuit around that by engaging the prefrontal cortex, which is more a newer brain, so to speak. I believe like things like dolphins and chimpanzees and such have this prefrontal cortex, but not all animals do. So in the prefrontal cortex, I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but this is kind of one of my favorite topics. The prefrontal cortex, we cultivate that by doing things, again, that are a little uncomfortable. Maybe using your non-dominant hand, maybe driving a different way to work, maybe using positive affirmations. And the prefrontal cortex is stimulated by things like compassion, bigger thinking, as opposed to myopic, fearful thinking, bigger, maybe spiritual type thinking. So just some thoughts on how to flip that switch and actually get into a different part of your brain to help with some of these very base fears. Let's see. Again, thinking of courageousness, we could practice balance poses to help cultivate, getting a little fearful. Oh my goodness, I might fall, but hey, it's okay if I do. Allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to practice heart openers in our physical practice, heart openers in our meditation practice. Again, loving kindness, sending blessings to yourself, to others, activates that prefrontal cortex. Maybe I'll do a whole little Dharma talk on that one day. So, fear. We all have them. We sit here. But can we, again, think bigger? And again, we reflected, I think, on a meditation from the mat. When he talked of ego, he talked a lot of fear. So can we get into those higher vibrations of meditation, spirituality, cultivating an intention and working with that to practice the bhavana or the opposite. So I had a closing reading here and then take us into our closing maybe relaxation or meditation. But this is from Meditations from the Mat by Rolf Gates. And he starts with a line from the Yoga Sutras. The desire to cling to life is inherent, both in the ignorant and in the learned. This is because the mind retains impressions of the death experience from many previous incarnations. We may or may not believe in reincarnation. That's not necessarily the point, but he goes on to really contemplate the difference between Eastern and Western beliefs when it comes to death. To the Western reader, it appears a little odd that Patanjali felt the need to explain the fear of death. Living in a society in which the preservation of life is a $1 trillion industry, and the worst thing that can happen to anyone is death, it's hard to imagine why anyone would feel the need to tell us why we're afraid to die. Here, more than anywhere else in the Yoga Sutras, we clearly see the cultural difference between East and West. In the Judeo-Christian context, life is a one-shot deal. Within a Hindu context, although this life is just another episode, it is a very long series of lives. The extent to which this has been true for the average practitioner of yoga over the ages cannot be overemphasized. In this life, we have been given a series of postures to perform. Death is one of them. Among sober alcoholics, there is a beautiful tradition of pointing out when a fellow traveler passes on. She died sober. This phrase implies the shift of focus that yoga teaches us. It's not the fact of our death that should concern us. Rather, our focus should be the spiritual condition in which we meet this eventuality. Pretty heavy stuff. The Cliches. The things that darken the heart. The things that darken the heart are also the things that can brighten the heart. So recognizing the Cliches as these veils or hindrances that can keep us from seeing our true self. Sometimes we're really in the muck of it. Life is dark. So notice that as those veils are parting, on the inside is this calm nature, this calm, peaceful nature. So even if things are cloudy and dark on the outside, and I mean this could be for years, on the inside is that little divine spark that knows itself. Kind of like, on a rainy day or a cloudy day, the sun is still there, even though we can't really feel it. We know it's there. I love the line by Pema Chodron, the quote from Pema Chodron. You are the weather. Oh no, I'm sorry. You are the sky. Everything else, it's just the weather. Pointing to our kind of divine nature of peace and clarity, that even if we can't see our blue sky nature, it's always there. So let's close our little talk here with a relaxation. So you recall you could get comfortable seated in a chair, on a meditation cushion. You could lie all the way down for relaxation. So just find the place of ease that you can get yourself into for, I think this will just be like a 5 or 10 minute relaxation to end our time together. And I really feel like this is a very good reflection back to the Cliches. And this is from Stephen Levine, A Year to Live, How to Live This Year as If It Were Your Last. So once you get comfortable, just take a few deep breaths to come back to yourself, to feel your breath arising and falling from that still place within you, that blue sky awareness within you. And then sitting or lying quietly, feel what sits here. Explore this body you sit in. Observe the field of sensation we call the body. Notice sensation's wordless quality. Its sense of simply being humming throughout the body. Its sense of simply being humming throughout the body. Go within sensation to that subtle presence by which the sensation is known. Feel the sensation within the sensation. settle into that sense of being, of aliveness vibrating in each cell. Of aliveness vibrating in each cell. Rest in being. In the silence of sensation, a sense of presence is discovered. Notice how any thought arising clutters that simple suchness and makes it think it is that solid something. That solid something or someone to which suffering adheres and loses its spacious context. Notice how any thought arising clutters and adheres, and you lose your spacious context. Rest in being. Just sit quietly and know. Let awareness sink into itself. Know what knows. Experience directly that sense by which you imagine you exist. Enter it wholeheartedly. Sit in that center of that hum. Does it have a beginning? Does it have an ending? Or is there just a sense of endless being, unborn and undying? Don't ask the mind, which always limits itself with definitions. Ask the heart, which cannot name it, but always is it. Rest in being. Feel within that timeless presence the vastness of being, the unnameable essence from which consciousness is produced. It is the common experience of your universal mystery. Since birth, there's been only one experience that has never changed. The experience of simply being. Not being this or that, just being. Since the moment we became aware, we were aware there has been a single ongoing experience underlying all else. It is our original face, the fire from which our tiny spark was thrown. Rest in the central illumination of being. Letting go of all that is impermanent, including the idea of impermanence, enter directly the whoosh of being. Acknowledging that even our immortality cannot defy our mortality. Let go of that which dies and discover what remains. When an 80-year-old Thai meditation master was visiting a center in New England, he asked the assembled students, "What is still after an enlightened person dies?" When a monk offered the orthodox reply that nothing remained, the teacher stopped him and said, "No, the truth remains." What is the truth we essentially are which does not die? What is our essential, original nature? And how does sinking into the present by which we remain present answer that inquiry? Recognize that awareness is your original nature before consciousness is born. That consciousness depends on the presence of awareness. But awareness depends on nothing. It simply is. Rest in being. See that which sees, looking through the eyes of our original face. Watch with your true eyes the appearance of an essential wisdom, a deeper knowing of your true nature. Rest in being. Rest in being. Reflecting on your true nature, on your original face. For as long as you have time for. I'll leave you in relaxation and contemplation. Arise only when you feel ready.